The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor as I stood at the sink, scrubbing away at the remnants of lunch. The rhythmic sound of water splashing against dishes filled the air, a mundane task that had become my constant companion. With each movement of the sponge, I couldn't help but feel the weight of years of unspoken emotions pressing down on me, a burden I carried silently. From the living room, I could hear Vanessa's laughter, accompanied by the low murmur of Dwight's voice. Their easy camaraderie was a stark contrast to the silent solitude I found myself enveloped in. It was as if I existed in a parallel universe, always on the outskirts of their shared world. "Amelia, could you bring me a soda?" Vanessa's voice pierced through the haze of my thoughts, snapping me back to reality. I turned, forcing a smile as I replied, "Of course, dear." Despite the warmth in my voice, a sense of resignation lingered beneath the surface. As I retrieved the can from the refrigerator and handed it to her, Vanessa barely spared me a glance before returning her attention to the television. The dismissive gesture stung, a reminder of my insignificance in her eyes. Returning to the sink, I resumed my task, my movements mechanical as I scrubbed at a stubborn stain on a plate. The weight of resentment settled heavily in my chest, a constant companion that refused to be ignored. "Hey honey, have you seen my keys?" Dwight's voice broke through the silence, drawing my attention away from the dishes. "They're on the hook by the door," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "Thanks," he said, his footsteps receding as he made his way to the entrance hall. I watched him go, a pang of longing stirring within me. Once his presence had been a source of comfort, a pillar of strength to lean on. But now it felt like he existed in a world separate from mine, his warmth a distant memory. As I continued to wash dishes, the sound of Vanessa's laughter mingled with Dwight's voice, creating a cacophony of noise that served as a constant reminder of my own invisibility. In that moment, I realized that I was nothing more than a servant in my own home, burdened by the weight of expectations that I could never hope to fulfill. As I dried my hands on a dish towel, I couldn't shake the feeling of isolation that settled over me like a heavy fog. It was a burden I had carried for far too long, an unseen weight that threatened to crush me beneath its weight. And as I stood alone in the kitchen, I knew that something had to change. But whether I had the strength to make that change remained to be seen. The evening settled like a heavy blanket over the house, casting shadows that danced across the walls as I sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen. Vanessa's voice echoed from the living room, sharp and cutting, each word laced with disdain. It was a sound that had become all too familiar, a constant reminder of the rift that had formed between us. "Old lady," she sneered, the words ringing in my ears like a relentless echo that refused to fade. I clenched my fists, willing the hurt to dissipate, but the wounds Vanessa's words left behind were deep and raw. No amount of time could erase the pain of being belittled by someone I had devoted so much of myself to. "Dwight, can you believe how clueless she is?" Vanessa's voice carried through the air, dripping with mockery. "I know, honey," Dwight replied, his tone nonchalant. "But she means well, I guess." I winced at his dismissive words, a reminder of the fractured bond between us. Once, Dwight's support had been my anchor in the storm, but now it felt like I was adrift in a sea of indifference. As I sat alone in the kitchen, the weight of Vanessa's disrespect pressing down on me like a heavy burden, I couldn't help but wonder where it had all gone wrong. How had the sweet child I had welcomed into my home become a stranger who saw fit to tear me down with each passing day? The sound of Vanessa's laughter floated through the air, mingling with Dwight's easy chatter, and I felt the sting of tears prickle at the corners of my eyes. In that moment, I realized that I was alone, trapped in a house that no longer felt like home, with nothing but the echoes of disrespect to keep me company. But amidst the echoes of disrespect, a small voice of defiance stirred within me. It was a whisper of self-preservation, a reminder that I was worthy of respect and dignity. And as I sat in the darkness of the kitchen, I knew that I couldn't continue to allow Vanessa's words to define me. It was time to reclaim my sense of self, to stand up for myself in the face of adversity. With a sense of determination, I rose from my seat and made my way to the living room, where Vanessa and Dwight sat engrossed in conversation. As I approached, their voices fell silent, their eyes turning to me with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Vanessa, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. She looked up, surprise flickering across her features. What about, Mom? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts before speaking. About the way you've been treating me, I replied, my voice firm. It's not acceptable, and it needs to stop. Vanessa's expression hardened, defiance flashing in her eyes. What are you talking about? I haven't done anything wrong. But I held her gaze, unyielding in my resolve. Your words have consequences, Vanessa, I said, and it's time you started taking responsibility for them. As the weight of my words hung heavy in the air between us, I knew that this was only the beginning. The road to healing would be long and difficult, but I was determined to reclaim my sense of self-worth, no matter the cost. The tension in the air was palpable as I sat across from Dwight at the dinner table, the distance between us stretching like an unbridgeable chasm. His gaze, once warm and affectionate, now held a coldness that chilled me to the bone. It seemed as though the very air between us crackled with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. I cleared my throat, the sound loud in the silent room, and ventured, "How was your day, Dwight?" He looked up from his plate, his expression guarded. "Fine," he muttered, his tone devoid of emotion. I bit back the urge to press further, knowing that any attempt at conversation would only be met with indifference. Instead, I focused my attention on my own meal, pushing the food around my plate without much appetite. The silence that settled over us was heavy, suffocating, each passing moment a reminder of the fractured bond between us. Once, Dwight's presence had been a source of comfort, his touch a balm for the wounds of the day. But now it felt like we existed in two separate worlds, our connection tenuous at best. As the minutes ticked by, I couldn't help but feel a sense of longing for the closeness we had once shared. Where had it all gone wrong? When had our love become so distant, so cold? "Dwight," I began, my voice hesitant. "Is everything okay between us?" He looked up, his gaze meeting mine for a fleeting moment before turning away. "I don't know, Amelia," he replied, his voice tinged with frustration. I don't know." The admission hung heavy in the air between us, a silent acknowledgement of the rift that had formed between us. In that moment, I realized that we were both lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, with no clear path forward. As we sat in silence, the weight of our fractured bond pressing down on us like a suffocating blanket, I couldn't help but wonder if we would ever find our way back to each other, or if the distance that had grown between us was too great to overcome. Suddenly, a knock at the door broke the oppressive silence, startling both Dwight and me. He glanced at me, uncertainty flickering in his eyes before rising from his seat to answer it. I watched him go, a sense of apprehension knotting in my stomach. When he returned, he held an envelope in his hand, his brow furrowed in confusion. "It's for you," he said, handing it to me. I took the envelope, my hands trembling slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, written in Vanessa's handwriting. My heart sank as I read her words, each line a painful reminder of the fractured relationship between mother and daughter. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, as I handed the letter to Dwight. He read it in silence, his expression growing somber with each passing moment. "We need to find a way to fix this," he said finally, his voice filled with determination. I nodded, grateful for his support as we sat together in the dimly lit room, the weight of our fractured bond hanging heavy in the air between us. But amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope flickered, a silent promise that perhaps, with time and effort, we could find our way back to each other. The morning of Vanessa's graduation dawned with a sense of foreboding that gnawed at my insides. As I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. Today was meant to be a day of celebration, a milestone in Vanessa's life, yet I couldn't muster an ounce of excitement. "Amelia, have you seen my tie?" Dwight's voice called out from the bedroom, interrupting my thoughts. "It's in the top drawer of your dresser," I replied, my voice barely audible, my mind preoccupied with a myriad of worries. As I made my way downstairs, the sound of Vanessa's laughter drifted down from the hallway, mingling with the nervous energy that permeated the house. Today should have been a joyful occasion, but all I felt was a sense of unease that tightened its grip around my heart. "Mom, can you help me with my hair?" Vanessa's voice interrupted my spiraling thoughts, pulling me back to the present. I forced a smile, masking the turmoil churning within me, and followed her into the living room. As I carefully braided her hair, my mind wandered, unable to shake the feeling of impending doom that hung over us like a shroud. "Thanks, Mom," Vanessa said, her voice tinged with excitement. "I can't believe I'm finally graduating." I forced another smile, swallowing back the bitter taste of resentment that threatened to overwhelm me. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," I replied, my voice strained with the weight of my own emotions. But even as the words left my lips, I knew they rang hollow. How could I be proud of someone who had made me feel so small, so insignificant? How could I celebrate a milestone that only served as a painful reminder of everything I had lost? But as we made our way to the car, the weight of my decision hung heavy in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the breaking point that had finally arrived. As we sat in the crowded auditorium, the excitement of the occasion lost on me, I felt a sense of detachment wash over me. Vanessa's name was called, and I watched as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, a sense of emptiness settling in the pit of my stomach. The applause faded into the background as I made my decision, a quiet resolve settling over me like a comforting blanket. I couldn't continue living a lie, pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "Dwight," I said, my voice firm as we made our way back to the car. "I need to talk to you." He glanced at me, his expression guarded. "What is it, Amelia?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I can't do this anymore," I confessed, my voice breaking with emotion. "I'm leaving." The words hung heavy in the air between us, a stark admission of the fracture that had formed between us. In that moment, I knew that there was no turning back. This was the moment when everything changed, when I finally took control of my own destiny, no longer willing to sacrifice my happiness for the sake of appearances. And as I watched Vanessa walk across the stage to receive her diploma, a revelation struck me with the force of a thunderbolt. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't continue to pretend that everything was fine, that our fractured family was worth fighting for. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. As the ceremony came to an end and the crowd began to disperse, I turned to Dwight with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. He looked at me, confusion etched on his face. "What is it, Amelia? Is something wrong?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I'm leaving, Dwight," I said, the words heavy on my tongue. "I can't stay here any longer. Not like this." And as the weight of my revelation settled over us like a shroud, I knew that there was no turning back. This was the beginning of the end, the moment when everything changed irrevocably. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew that I was finally taking control of my own destiny. Leaving the confines of the house that had once been my prison felt like shedding a heavy coat that I had worn for far too long. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, a sense of liberation washed over me, lifting the weight of years of resentment from my shoulders. Each step I took away from that suffocating environment felt like a step towards reclaiming my freedom and autonomy. The streets were quiet as I made my way through the familiar neighborhood, each footfall echoing my newfound sense of independence. The fading sunlight painted the world in hues of orange and pink, a beautiful contrast to the darkness I had endured for so long. As I walked, memories of happier times mingled with the pain of betrayal, reminding me of the journey that had led me to this moment of liberation. But instead of dwelling on the past, I focused on the present and the promising future that lay ahead of me. "Mom, wait." Vanessa's voice echoed from behind me, interrupting the serenity of my thoughts. I turned, surprised to see her standing on the sidewalk, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. I wanted to talk to you," she replied, her voice hesitant. "I know things haven't been great between us, but I want to make things right." I studied her for a moment, torn between the desire to reconcile and the need to prioritize my own well-being. "I appreciate the sentiment, Vanessa," I said finally, my voice gentle. "But I think it's best if we take things slow." She nodded, her expression a mix of disappointment and understanding. "I understand," she said quietly. I want you to know that I'm trying." Despite the pain of the past, I felt a flicker of hope stir within me at her words. Perhaps there was still a chance for healing and reconciliation, but for now I needed to focus on myself and my own journey towards peace and happiness. With a final nod to Vanessa, I turned and continued on my way, each step reinforcing my newfound sense of liberation. No longer bound by the expectations of others, I embraced the solitude and found solace in the quiet companionship of my loyal dog. As I walked into the sunset, the weight of years of resentment began to lift, replaced by a sense of freedom and possibility that I had long thought was lost to me. In that moment, I knew that I was finally on the path to finding happiness, no longer shackled by the past but free to embrace the future with open arms. The days stretched into weeks, and with each passing moment, I felt the weight of my past life slowly slipping away. In the quiet solitude of my new home, surrounded by the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the wind, I found a sense of peace that had long eluded me. It was a haven away from the chaos and turmoil that had defined my previous existence. My days were filled with simple pleasures, long walks with my dog, quiet moments of reflection, and the freedom to pursue my own interests without the weight of expectation bearing down on me. The tranquility of my surroundings provided the perfect backdrop for introspection and self-discovery. One morning, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, lost in thought, I heard a familiar voice call out to me from the end of the driveway. "Mom, are you okay?" Vanessa's voice broke through the stillness of the morning, drawing me out of my thoughts. I looked up to see her standing there, her expression a mix of concern and uncertainty. It was the first time she had visited since our conversation on the sidewalk, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension at the sight of her. "Vanessa," I said, my voice soft with surprise. "What are you doing here?" She hesitated for a moment before taking a tentative step forward, her eyes searching mine for any trace of forgiveness. "I wanted to talk to you," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "I know I haven't been the best daughter, but I want to make things right." I studied her for a moment, torn between the desire to reconnect and the need to maintain the boundaries I had established for my own well-being. "I appreciate the sentiment, Vanessa," I said finally, my voice gentle. "But I think it's best if we take things slow." She nodded, her expression a mix of disappointment and understanding. "I understand," she said quietly. I want you to know that I'm trying." Despite the pain of the past, I felt a flicker of hope stir within me at her words. Perhaps there was still a chance for healing and reconciliation, but for now, I needed to focus on myself and my own journey towards peace and happiness. As Vanessa and I sat together on the porch, the quiet hum of conversation filling the air, I knew that I was finally on the path to finding peace. No longer bound by the expectations of others, but free to forge my own path forward, guided by the strength and resilience that had carried me through the darkest days of my life.